ultimately, this is the bread that I was most proud of. I think that maybe you all can agree that that is a good looking loaf. And if you don't agree, don't tell me. When the fire department came by, when they found out I had a gigantic Italian oven in my house, basically. Today, we're discussing when I started my micro bakery in my home during the COVID era. And it was kind of a tricky time, if everybody remembers. It was back on the 15th of March in 2020 when the whole world was going to shut down, or certainly the United States shut down for 2 weeks to flatten the curve. It was a crazy time. And how that hit my family was I am a bakery consultant and I also sell bakery equipment, and that basically put me out of a job for a period of time. So we was kind of left with the decision of, well, what to do. We had some finances, and did we just want to buckle down and hold on, or did we want to take this opportunity to do something that I've dreamed about my entire life? Pretty much going back to, I think, 1999 or 2000, I got the concept of I wanted to bake in a home-based bakery, and attempted to try to do it several times early on in the 2000s. But, other opportunities were coming along, and I didn't live in the right space. And so I had calculated how to run a bakery and or make a profit in a micro bakery for many years, and went and visited micro bakeries. I remember going down in the early 2000s to Della Fattoria. I think it was 2003, and spend some time with them, and also spent some time with Alan Scott, the oven builder. And that's a whole story, is to go, showed up at his place. He invited me down, and showed up there at like 11 o'clock at night. He gave me room and board, and so proceeded to take me around and show me bakeries, wood fired oven bakeries, and also arranged for me to kind of hang out at Della Fattoria at their farm there and bake with them for a day. And that was just super fascinating. And if I recall, don't hold me to this, but I think that their facility was around 900 square feet or something like that. They had the two large wood fired ovens that were kind of in a covered area outside of their shaping and mixing area. And I just remember doing calculations and seeing how much they were producing at the time. Um, maybe it wasn't that much, but I wanted to kind of replicate that. So from most of my life, I've dreamed of owning a bakery with a wood fired oven. And by the time it rolled around in 2020 that I had the opportunity to do it, I didn't really feel that I had the stamina to take on the wood cutting and stoking the fire and keeping the oven to temperature. I wanted to focus on making money, making bread and selling bread, and not so much run ragged on the side of the wood fired oven. I had a strong relationship with Empire Bakery Equipment because I handle a lot of sales for them out on the West Coast and nationwide too. And so I turned to them and asked if they had some type of demo oven or something that I could get at a affordable rate, and they were able to do that for me. I was able to select the mini tube gas deck oven, and the reason I went with that was because of power issues in my home. So I lived on 20 acres, and we pretty much a remote property. It was a very, very nice property, and we had two choices to decide between going into the shop. We had a 2,100 square foot shop, but it was about 50 yards away from the house. It had plenty of power in regards to just single phase power, but it didn't have any plumbing or anything like that. So bringing water to it wouldn't have probably been that big of a challenge, but ultimately sewer, there was no sewer out there. And of course we were being a rural property, we were on septic. So this was my first option. in regards to where to put the bakery. I thought about taking the side that's closest to us here in the man doors, and it was insulated in there, and we had 200 amps of power. Really, it's a great place for woodworking and woodworking tools and things like that. Would have taken a bit of work to get it into a bakery, and so ultimately we selected our 3-car garage that's attached to the house by just a door. Other than that, the building itself or the garage itself, it didn't really share any walls, and so that was pretty nice because, of course, late night hours and listen to some music or podcasts, and just in general working, it didn't really disturb the living quarters of the home. So we ultimately went ahead and selected this. As you can see here, the room on the left there was an office that the original homeowners built. So I think that they took what would have been a 3-car garage, closed that in, and didn't put a door there. So that was already insulated, already had some heat in there. There was no plumbing to it, so we had to tackle that. So ultimately, I selected the mini tube gas deck oven, and at first, I was looking at one of the medium-sized models. Here is the cut sheet for it. At first, I was looking at the 5-deck 100 by 100, which is right down here, and I was just kinda calculating the overall capacity for my space and what that kind of looked like, and then how many hours I would have to bake. So my space was about 750 square feet. And if anybody's watched any of my other videos, you'll know that I promote that 1 pound per square foot of production space is fairly comfortable and typically profitable. And so you can ultimately hit around 1.3 pounds per square foot if you need be on a busy time or a busy day. And for me, if you think about, I was going to make 2 pound loaves, which ultimately I did, 900 grams. That's about 300 of those. That's 600. That's a little bit less than a pound per square foot. 300 loaves at 2 pounds, 600 pounds of dough on a busy day. But that was more than adequate for us to be able to produce that and get it sold and delivered because I was doing the whole job myself. I didn't have any help in the bakery, and so I was producing the bread and going to markets and those types of things. So that was more than enough. But what I wanted was to be able to bake that amount pretty quickly, let's say on a Saturday morning. So ultimately settled on the 5-deck 100 by 140, which I'm not going to do all the calculations today, but you can see the surface area is 80 square feet. So let's say roughly 7.5, 8 square meters. And if you do the calculations like from my previous videos that I've done, you can do about 18 pounds of dough to 20 pounds of dough per square meter per hour. And this also says you could do about 135 pounds in a bake, which is fairly accurate. I was able to get a little bit more than that because I was doing 2-pound loaves. I could get 16 per deck. And of course, I could bake more than just one load per hour. I could probably bake 1.5 per hour. So I could get 80 loaves in the deck oven at one time, and so if you do the math, I could 3 hours easily could do 240 loaves, but I was able to hit that 250 to 300 loaves in approximately 3 hours if I didn't, let the oven run empty or anything like that. So all of my breads were produced starting the day before, and they were mixed, shaped, and baked. Or sorry, mixed and shaped, and then ultimately baked the following day. So this is back to the beginning construction of the garage area. Basically, it already had drywall up, but we wanted to fix all the dings and everything. It had never been painted or anything like that. And this room in here that will become my walk-in cooler ran by what's called a cool bot. So as you can see inside, there's a window there, and so a standard air conditioner, like an 18,000 BTU air conditioner. Home Depot it's a wonderful option. So the CoolBot basically kind of takes control of that AC and keeps it from frosting up, and so it will maximize its cooling abilities, and so it can cool down past its like lowest set point. So its set point probably is what, 65 or 68 degrees before those things just frost up on their own. The CoolBot actually has some wires that plug into the coils and will keep the coils from frosting up, and it will force it to cool down lower. And so I was able to have that room eventually be, 36 degrees even in the heat of summer. So it worked very well. I completely insulated that room and then put up FRP, which is that fiberglass reinforced panels or something like that. So I would set it, most of the time, I would set it at around 45, I think was my spot. And unless it was the hottest day in the summertime and I wanted to get a jump on it and have that thing as cold as possible, I could turn it down to 36 or something. This walk-in held 8 racks. So if I'm not going to do all the math today, but to my calculations, that percentage of my bake, which most of my products were overnight fermented sourdough products, and so I could hold a couple hundred loaves in there probably. And then I did have some same day bake items that didn't go in the walk-in, ciabatta and baguettes and some other odds and ends. Like I think we even made it a garlic baguette or something like that, and challah and some things. So, but the majority of my bread was in here, and it could hold 8 racks, and they could all be filled, and that CoolBot would handle it. It was great. It was fantastic. So if you have an exterior wall, even if you're opening a retail bakery in a commercial building, there's nothing wrong with considering putting in a CoolBot, because the cool thing about this is that if that air conditioner goes out, Home Depot's 25 minutes away. Go in there, buy a new AC. I'm not calling anybody. And for the price of it, what is it, 300 or $400? If I was run, if we had a full walk-in cooler, then I would have had a service technicians, because I certainly don't know how to work on those things. Maybe you do, but then we could just swap out the AC. Literally, no big deal. So it worked fantastic. I highly recommend, if you're running a micro bakery of any size like this at all, that you look into that. And if you're even in a more northern climate, there's another company called Free Air, and you can go ahead and use outside cool air, like in the wintertime, and bring it in to the correct amount into your walk-in cooler. So CoolBot and Free Air, something to check out for you guys. So here is that other room that we had carpet in, and so that was all glued down from previous owner. So we had to pull that carpet up and literally had to grind with a wheel grinder and grind off the glue that was stuck there. So that was quite a process. Very, very dirty and nasty, but constructions can be that way. So yeah, this is the future mix room here. Just finished the painting and moving forward. Here's a quick photo of us digging the trench to connect to our existing septic tank. That was about, I don't know, 30 or 40 yards away. So we had to come through the back wall of the foundation there and run drain pipe for the bakery to meet up with that septic tank. Here's a quick photo of the delivery from Webstront, and I was able to use my tractor and the forks there and just get that unloaded and store tables and sinks and everything. So there was definitely a few $1,000s in odds and ends that was purchased there from Webstront. So we chose epoxy for the floor, and this is just a Home Depot product that you kind of break the bags, you mix them together, and then you spread it basically as quickly as you can, as even as you can. I think you use a squeegee and kind of just move the epoxy around. I have to say it worked great. We just you do have to acid wash the concrete. They give you that in the mixture, and so we have to acid wash the concrete and really focus on if there was any oil stains on the concrete or any grease, which this was a garage, so we had plenty of that in there. And so but it really turned out well and seemed to be pretty durable. I chose the lighter color because I don't like seeing flour dust. It seems like if it's a dark floor, you can never get the flour dust off of it, no matter how hard you try. And then there's streaks across it. So we chose something that the flour would kind of blend in a little bit. So this next photo is the mixed room coming together. Again, the equipment hasn't arrived, but starting to put things together. That table I built myself had the booze block top ordered, but then the legs and everything else was built by me and a friend of mine, and that worked out quite well. There's another angle of the mix room, everything kind of coming together there. So this is the oven being delivered, and so as I mentioned, I ordered the Empire Mini Tube 5 deck 100 by 140. I'll have to look at the spec sheet here and just show the weight. It is 4,519 pounds for that model that is being unloaded here. And so you can do a couple things when you order a mini tube and probably in any oven of this size. Ultimately, the next models up do have to be assembled by a technician. But this particular model of mini tube, you can have it pre-assembled and they'll put it together and then ship it to you whole. So then you are picking up the whole oven at once. It's already everything's put together. Of course, you have to connect everything, the water and the power and drains and all of those things, but it's fully assembled. And I, along with some local tradesmen, we did our own installation, saving the flight and the cost of Empire sending in someone in. Plus, they weren't really available at this time. You know, if you recall that flying and people just didn't want to travel, and coming across country from New York, where their headquarters are, was just really not something anybody really wanted to do. And I was also on a tight budget, and they were working with me to get this done as affordably as possible. So I can tell you that that forklift is undersized. It's probably a 5 or 6 thousand pound forklift, but that's, if you know anything about forklifts, that's the weight capacity right up against the headache, right at where the forks meet the frame there, not out at the tip of the fork. And so this particular forklift is definitely undersized. We had to lift it up and get it off the truck and then have the truck drive out from underneath the oven, which was super scary. And then I came in from the other side with my tractor and supported it as we lowered it down to the ground. This is something we can tell you up front, that pretty much load to ride, this is the way things come. It's just in general, you're responsible for getting it off the truck unless there's a lift gate. If you have a smaller piece of equipment, they might lower it to the ground. In this case, we had to put a strap to it and then pull, slide the oven to the back of the truck, because that's not where it was. It was all the way into the front of the truck. And so we had to pull it back and then go ahead and then from there lift it up, get it off the truck, and get it into the bakery. So it's it was a little precarious. I would definitely advise, if you are ordering an oven of 4,500 plus pounds, that you certainly go a good 30% higher. I found that when I did move the oven later on, that by getting the 12,000 pound forklift, though, and one of those telescoping ones, it was much easier to, reach in, pick up the oven, move it around, and you just had more than enough power, and that's a good thing. Totally a good thing. So, here's another picture of the oven after we've got it on the ground, and you can see that the tires on the forklift on the back there are still in the air. So, I mean, the oven is definitely just heavier than the capacity of the forklift can really handle. The plan was to stick it into the garage and to move it in with a pallet jack. I had rented a pallet jack as well. The pallet jack that I got it blew a seal. And so even though it was a 5,500 pound pallet jack or capacity, that the hydraulic system just would not hold the oven up. Later, when I moved the oven, I got a good pallet jack and I was able to move the oven around. And you're supposed to be able to do that. But unfortunately, I could not on this oven. So we had to do what is called jack and roll. which is basically jack up the oven and put it on basically, heavy duty roller skates, designed for moving heavy objects. And those are pieces of steel that we would roll it on, so we didn't mar up the floor and rip off all of my epoxy that has just been on there for a couple weeks. This is a team of guys that live local that dove in and helped me out. That was great. Hats off to those guys. I really appreciate their help. And there is the oven in its final resting place. So beautiful, beautiful oven. Next comes the stack work, and this is what you would see from Empire. There's two protrusions going up. The one on the left there would be standard 6-inch B vent pipe, the same thing you would have on almost any type of propane installation. And that's just common for this typical oven, whether you're running natural gas or propane. That's what is basically the flue that goes out. Now, the front pipe is 7-inch stainless, and it is the vapor pipe. And so that you have a choice to go up and out the roof. Also, in my case, I went up and went through up and turned like an elbow and then came out the actual soffit of the roof of the bakery. And so you do have to be careful that you have to go straight up, because basically the condensation does eventually can turn back into water. Much of it does. And so if it runs back down, you'll see that here's a drain at the bottom here, kind of this Chinaman's cap or whatever they call it. And that goes down to a drain. And I'll get to my drain system in a minute. But so I went up and turned an elbow and came out. I went up into the rafters and then turned in an elbow and then came out the soffit. So mine worked. I only had one protrusion through my roof. So my mixers arrived, and I did get a three-phase mixer, but here is in the corner, you can see I have a rotary phase converter. And so basically, kind of in a nutshell, this isn't electrical advice, but I had single phase. And so, a rough way to look at that is I needed to bring in three times the power in amps over to the mixer. And so in my case, that's actually what I did, but that's not the actual calculation. But I brought over a 50 amp breaker, so 45. This is a 15 amp three phase mixer. And so I brought over a 50 amp breaker that fed into the rotary phase converter. That changes the power over to three phase, and then the mixer is actually plugged in. It worked great. I mean, I mixed, stiff pretzel doughs. I did some bagels sometimes, and certainly would fill to capacity. This mixer, 132 pounds. So this is the Iris 60 spiral mixer, and I definitely right to the brim, of sourdough. So yeah, my sourdough wasn't super wet, wasn't super stiff either. It's probably 68, 69% hydration on our sourdough. And we kind of lean more towards like maybe a San Francisco sourdough, because we found that people in North Idaho were looking for the actual acidic flavor. They weren't just looking for naturally leavened bread. And so it was kind of like to get that in that process and stuff like that, that's where we landed on our hydration. So, but anyway, I filled this mixer to capacity multiple times every production day, and we didn't have any problems with power. I definitely promote the American rotary phase converter here. If you're in the market and you're looking for something to power three phase equipment, that they can totally hook you up. This photo is bringing in the propane line to the bakery. So we had 2,000-gallon propane tank installed, and I think they fill to about 80% capacity. So let's say we actually had 800 gallons of propane on hand. And ultimately, that was able to last, that's pretty much a year's worth of propane for this particular oven with my system. I was baking 3 times a week. But even in the wintertime, I actually left the oven on like at 300 degrees overnight, just because there was no other heat in the garage portion of the bakery. There was in the mix room, but not in the oven area. and so we just, needed to keep it above freezing. So we left the oven on, and so I mean, we really got good performance from the propane and that system. So this is it, trenching over to the bakery. Just another view of the mixer, and you can see that out towards the garden area, which ultimately that was a beautiful setup because that came into play where we had chives and some other things that we could occasionally use for different types of bread. So one of our popular breads was a potato chive, believe it or not. But it wasn't about just being potato chive, but the potatoes, the roasted Yukon Gold potatoes, then when they smash into the dough, really creates this super moist, tender bread. And but it's made with real potatoes, of course, not potato flour. And so that was a really popular bread, and I have to say it was really good. It's really good. So we ordered the oven sometime in March, and I think it was delivered. I'd have to look at the timestamps, but I think it was probably delivered in June sometime, and then we proceeded to get it all hooked up. So by July, and I was able to get my first batch of bread produced on the 4th of July of 2020. This is the first batch of ciabatta going in. And so what I've learned is that there was a lot of trial and error. So I have been consulting and working in bakeries my entire life, but I wanted to make my own bread. So some of these breads that you'll see coming up were me trying to figure out what I wanted my bread to look like. That was not taken from a baking book, or wasn't borrowed from the concept from another customer. It's just like between me and my baking ability and my customers, ultimately what does that look like? And so some of these first few photos are just me baking with liquid levain and testing it out and getting familiar with the oven and seeing what ultimately the North Idaho community wanted from me as a baker. So at this stage, when the oven is fired, we're not open for business, and we're not even signed up for any farmers markets. That's a whole nother hurdle that I'll get to, but you'll see that the bakery's coming along. Things have arrived. We're testing. There, I still don't have my big scale. I use this packing scale to begin with to weigh some of the first batches of bread and get some tests going. But ultimately, I have a nice digital scale coming. Shelves are going to be going on the wall, and just in general, there's still things left to do. You can see the sink. Now, I'm a big fan of this style of sink in every bakery size near the mixer. I love the spray nozzle because if you get dough on your hands, it's hard to scrub it off, but it's if you got some warm water, close to hot water, you're spraying it, you can actually shoot it and spray the debris off of your hands easier than you can trying to scrub it. And certainly with soap, it gets just slimy and you're there for 10 minutes. With that, I could probably get my hand that's completely doughy from ciabatta or something like that. I could get it sprayed off and just very, very quickly, even especially pouliche or liquid levain or something. So that's really my hand washing sink. Now you'll see that there is a hand washing sink over here next to it. Why do I put that there? Because of code, right? Everybody wants you to have a dedicated hand washing sink. I don't think I ever used that small sink. Always used the big one. Got some industrial shelves that ultimately can hold all the additional flour, such as what we got, rye meal here. I have some high gluten. We have just some different things. Harvest King was the main bread flour that I use, but we were also playing with the acidity level on the sourdough. Then I would had a portion of high gluten in there from this Sperry. And then you can see I had plenty of baskets that we used and also the dough tubs. These were great. Another Webstront purchase. And so that's where we fermented all the bread in. There's a straight shot of the sink setup that I'm pretty fond of, whether it's any size bakery. Behind it is the FRP. So, you can wipe down the walls easy. You have your hand sink for code and ultimately the sink that you will use. And I didn't have a water meter in this particular bakery. So this is, of course, I had to weigh the water, which was totally fine. For my batch sizes, it was pretty straightforward. This is the main sink on the opposite side of the wall, so they kind of connect, and then as you can see, the black pipe is my drain pipe that goes out the bakery right there, where everything joins. So we got multiple sinks all coming together and then going out that drain, which heads out to that the septic tank, which was in the earlier photo. So this sink was a little undersized. I guess you could put a sheet pan down in it. I wanted a different size, but ultimately Webstronk was out of stock when I ordered, so I couldn't submerge the whole sheet pan, but it worked. I didn't really use sheet pans except for some buns and rolls and things. So these shelves were fantastic for washing out, the Cambros that had poolish in them and stuff like that, and they could just drip down onto the sink. So the whole thing, it worked out really well. I was very pleased with this setup. Again, there you can see it. Also had the spray nozzle on that one, and then the big swivel head on the faucet there. There's a view basically into the garage. And again, at this period of time, we're not into production. We're just trying to get everything going, test bake, and at the same time, knock out some last minute things. Shelving is being hung up. And ultimately, we didn't get into full production in 2020 because the farmers markets were already going. And so it was difficult for us to get in. And of course, as you know, there's so many different rules and regulations in farmers markets. Some you had to be a complete certified kitchen. They didn't honor cottage food law. Some that they already had an established bread vendor there, so that was not going to work. They wouldn't let us in there. So we kind of had to look around. What didn't end up being that big of a challenge the following year, we got approved in several markets, but to start halfway through the summer, we weren't welcomed with open arms, I'll say. So now the mix room is coming together, and a couple things I'll just point out here is that I really like using these types of mobile bins for flour. They work well. They become a stand, like if you move it into the middle here and you stack boards on it for koosh or something like that. It's just better. It gives you another mobile thing. I used them all the time. And whether if you're going to go fold a dough or something like that, you can roll it out because it has the lid on it and it's really solid with these wheels. And you can plop a bin of dough on top. Um, Matter of fact, when I was pulling dough out of the mixer, I would put this right next to the mixer. As you can see, it's a little shorter, and then with one of those dough bins on top, worked out great. You can still clear the bowl and go right into the bin, no issues. So I thought that whole setup was good. There's a lot of these little tricks and techniques if you're a new baker that you might pick up on. It doesn't necessarily make that big of a deal, but cumulative they do that. For example, what happens if I got taller flour bins and then you set a dough box on top of that flour bin and the dough box is even higher than the lip of the bowl, so that means you get to clear with an arm of dough, right? You clear the bowl, but then you even have to go up higher, and actually you want to clear the bowl and go right into a bin. So it's just a little thing, right? It's just a small little thing, so simple. Another screenshot to the other side. Finally got the shelving up top. And again, the same system where everything can drip down. Plenty of shelving. Try to use as much vertical as you can as you're putting your bakery together. So in the beginning, when I'm testing out different recipes, of course, I like whole grain baking. And so I was playing with some sourdoughs that were 60-70% whole wheat flour and rye and stuff like that. And ultimately, that's really not what my customer base wanted. They wanted just a slight, maybe a little bit, 10%, I think is what I ultimately settled on, 10% whole wheat. They wanted more of a traditional San Francisco style sourdough. And I think, to be honest with you, a lot of people were after kind of the tartine look. And so ultimately, that's where we wind up. But in the beginning, I was test baking some whole grain sourdoughs, and that's what you see here. There's a shot of the oven room. We added these track lights up top, which was amazing. And I never did get rid of the garage doors. They I wanted to be able to enclose those and just put a man door in there with some windows and stuff like that. I did want to keep one garage door and then close in the other side, and because of flour deliveries, you want to be able to get a pallet of flour inside the bakery, or you want to be able to access the bakery in some capacity if you can, if you have that choice. And so, but I never did get rid of it. So you see the garage doors up top here. Now we're going to get into testing some of those sourdoughs. And so this was a liquid levain based sourdough. And reason I say that liquid is the key point here, that ultimately I found out that I wasn't getting enough acidity from just using a liquid levain. So I ended up doing a liquid levain mother that was always kept going, and then I would take a portion of that and build a stiff starter that had two different temperature fermentation schedules. So one would be a warm to activate the yeast production, and the second mixing of it would be a cold overnight. But it was a stiff starter. So ultimately, that's how I arrived at getting the acidity level that I wanted. But these breads are headed in the right direction, but ultimately not baking dark enough, and still needed to dial in my what I would consider my bread. In my opinion, every baker should have a quality balance beam scale, and I actually have it here with me. I can demo it at some point and share with you, but ultimately, that's just, you got to have one of these in your bakery. Yeah. So shout out to Pin Scales on this particular scale. They still make the old fashioned cast iron balance beam scale that you see here, and it's just a wonderful, wonderful piece of equipment. And so ultimately, that's what I scaled everything on the bench, right? So every 900 grams or 2 pounds was scaled on that, and then I didn't use the boat, but and this has a 2 pound slide on there, so it's 1 pound to the middle, 2 pounds to the far side, and so you could scale almost everything with no weights and anything. You just use the platform you're scaling on. My digital scale arrived from Duran Scales. This is a wonderful scale company. It's an expensive scale, especially for a micro bakery like mine, but it I think it was $1,800 or $2,000 or something like that. But they got like 1,000% load protection. You can chop on these things. I think you'll see here that, it's just solid stainless steel. It's a tank. It'll last 20 years plus, unless somebody's going to use a knife to press the buttons and gouge the buttons or something. But, it's just a tank of a scale, and it went up to 100 pounds. So what I like about that is that you could actually easily just put the whole bag of flour on there. So 50-pound bag, you rip open the top, and let's say I need a 65 pounds. Well, then from my bin below, I could add 15 pounds to that if I chose to, and still go past the 50-pound mark, no problem. Then if I needed some whole wheat in there, I just could have put it in the bag if I wanted to scale into the bag. If I wanted to put the whole 50 pounds up there, let's say I needed 48, well, then I could just hit zero, then take 2 pounds out, and then go from 50 to 48. And you'll be able to it's just so practical. And then also, if you put a dough box on there and you just want to scale the entire dough, I mean, you pretty much can, because you can scale all the dry ingredients for the dough, because my mixer would hold 132 pounds. And of course, a lot of that is water. So easily could get 75, 80 pounds onto the scale, no problem. And it did go down to, I think, 5 or 10 grams was its low end. And so ultimately, I had a smaller digital scale that would be for micro ingredients such as salt. And if I did use yeast in a Polish baguette or something like that, then I could scale 1 gram or 2 grams, right? Because that's kind of your number, is 1 gram per 1,000 grams of flour in a Polish type of thing. So that's how that was. You can also see I added a thermometer in the back there on the wall, which was super handy, just to be able to look over and see, because sometimes you're hot and you're working, but it's still, only 70 degrees. I got the window open here. Yeah, there's a screen, and it looks like it's 70, 72 degrees or something like that. Perfect, perfect baking temperature. So you can see the garden out the back there. Wonderful setup. Here we had a customer that was interested in purchasing a mini tube, and so he flew into Spokane, and I picked him up at the airport, brought him over, and let him just basically test bake in the bakery for a couple days. That was a great visit, and I was able to show him some of my baking techniques, and then he would just share with me about what he was wanting to accomplish, and so it was just a great visit. Here is just running the oven. So by the way, you'll see this setup here is I'm using peels. This is my preferred method if you're going to forego the loader. So the loader is $12,000, something like that. They're not cheap. Um, so I didn't add that to my oven, but the loader definitely would be worth it if you're doing any more small products or anything of that nature, if it's in your budget. But the loader does attach to the oven, and it's a counterweight system. It's called the Easy Loader, and Empire offers that. It's absolutely wonderful. But me, I'm baking 2-pound loaves, right? So for the most part, I can get them in and out of the oven, shooting them off the peel. So I trimmed these peels to basically cover half, or each peel covers a quarter of the oven. So I would load one side or the back, and then I'd load the front. So 4 peels would go into each deck, 4 peel loads. So I would prep 2 at a time. So half the oven's worth of product would go in, steam, then I would load them again. Another half of the oven would go in, and I would steam again. So pretty good little system. Prop the peels up on the back with this mobile table and put them on the face of the oven, load them up. You'll see me doing this time and time again in the coming photos. So now we're kind of honing in on the sourdough. It's not there yet. I'll let you know when it's when we're happy with it. So, but you can see the fermentation. We're headed towards a more sour bread. You can see the fermentation of fish eyes on the crust. And so ultimately, I decided I wanted even more color than normal, probably maybe more normal than let's say the San Francisco style sourdough or something like that. But I wanted that really rich dark color. You could almost say it's like burning, but not. And so to get that, I ultimately used some diastatic malt. I think I was at a 0.5% of that so through the overnight fermentation and then diastatic malt and everything else, ultimately I was able to get the full color that I wanted. And you'll see that coming up here in a bit. Trying all different types of baskets, some more ciabatta bread. This actually looks pretty decent. Playing with some different rolls, taking a break, playing the peel guitar, and I don't know if this was a photo shoot or something going on here for publicity of some type. We did some pretzels, and that I would have liked to do those more, but they were a lot of work without some type of molder, to make the strings. So anyway, they were wonderful though. So you can see here from this photo, just we've gotten into winter, and I think you'll see out the window on a couple photos that there was snow on the ground. So we did not make it into any markets in the summer and the fall, and I think we sold some bread to some locals that knew about the bakery and stuff like that. But we're gearing up for come February and March, then we really ramp up and start hitting markets and doing deliveries and stuff like that. But this ultimately was a concern of ours for the road going into our property that I actually had to plow it. It was a 1.5 mile road, and so never seemed like a problem plowing it until you have bread in the oven and you need to plow. So it's that ultimately was a challenge. Here we have my friend Todd who visited and making some baguettes. There's the baguette. So like I talked about, that we had different breads that had different characteristics. And so these were French baguette. Now, what I'll say is what I arrived on these French baguettes was I like the part of the pouliche, but I also like a little liquid levain in my baguette. So ultimately, this was a combination style baguette that there was a pouliche and a liquid levain, and then it was mixed and baked the same day. So those two starters came together on a Saturday morning, mixed the dough. It was 2.5 to 3 hour fermentation. divide, shape, bake. And so ultimately, I felt like it was really the best of both worlds. A thin, crispy crust, open crumb. They were to die for. They were great. This was our display at a local market that, again, this is actually a whole grain loaf. And we did not have our packaging figured out at the time. So it we ultimately wrapped everything but also went into a paper bag, and that was because of COVID going on. And so eventually at the markets they would buy like 10 loaves of bread or something like that. I mean, a lot of people would, and so they would take them and freeze them, and so it was kind of a good way to just have them ready for them to go into the freezer. So we did saran wrap them, and to be honest, it was really quick for our 150 to 300 loaves that we would do. It was a great way. You could wrap pretty quickly. I think I could wrap everything in about a half an hour. And yeah, you did go through some packaging, but you knew that the bread was safe. There was no bugs landing on it. It wasn't drying out in the summer heat at the farmers markets. It worked out pretty well. So I probably would do that again. Unless I just knew that I had a different setup, like sneeze guards and stuff like that. But you'll see how I set up the market stand and how it was kind of like a grocery store where you could come in and people could pick up their bread or they would look at it, as opposed to me serving every customer that they could come into our stand. So you'll see how that works here in a few minutes. We also played with a stamp. I'm not sure that is the best way to go about it. It did get us through the first few maybe month or two with the stamp, but we didn't ultimately stick with that. We went to the stickers and then ultimately a windowed bag. See some bulls. Off time made some pizza, which was fantastic. So this will show you here. I kept this photo in the stream just because this will show you this exit on the 6-inch B vent pipe going out the back. This is where the exhaust gases go. And here you have what's called a draft inducer, which basically your HVAC guy or gal would cut into the side of that to basically take some tin snips, and then it screws to it. So that draft inducer is helping the draft escape the building. And then this up front is 7-inch stainless steel. And you can see, if you zoom in, maybe I can zoom in right there. We have a drain coming out. So again, what condensation can escape goes out the flue completely. If it turns back into water and runs back down this pipe, it will come into this drain, and then I go to our drain. So that's a little drain line right there. And here is the fan on top of the oven. This is what comes with the mini tube, and it's a really robust vapor fan. Basically, it's a integrated type 2 hood basically, and it really can move that steam that comes out of the deck, moves it up and out and gets it out of the bakery. And it works really well. I didn't run it all the time. You can turn it on and off. You can, if you're just loading and doing some basic work, especially if it's cold or something like that in the bakery, you just keep it off. But when you do pop open the doors or open the drafts on top on each deck, then you can just kick that on, fires right up, and you can really move some air. So that works really well. So on this photo, you can see my walk-in. It is completely done and functioning, and you'll see inside it here in a bit. Also, these racks, I believe that is a Home Depot rack. So I basically bought 2 or 3 racks to get that many shelves. And what I think a Home Depot Metro style rack just has 4 or 5 shelves or something like that. So, I mean, if you're putting bread on it, you would fill it up quickly. So this is about 8 inches between each shelf, and I just wanted to totally maximize as many shelves on it as possible because I'm just putting bread on it, nothing else. And so, as you'll see, it's just like I could get 100 loaves of bread almost on one rack, which was amazing. Really maximizing your space just by spending, those racks aren't that much. I think sometimes they're $100. And so if you buy a couple of them, you can, steal the racks. So I had poles laying around somewhere else. Don't forget your fire extinguishers. That's what pops out to me on this particular picture here. That, of course, when the fire department came by, when they found out I had a gigantic Italian oven in my house, basically, that they wanted to make sure that I had fire extinguishers. So these are 10-pound fire extinguishers that are hanging up around the place. Don't worry, I never had to use them. So as you can see, that there's snow outside on the ground, but we're fully stocked with flour. Probably going to do a holiday bake, and we're gearing up for farmers markets that are coming. The seasons have passed, and dead of winter, the garden is wound down. Beautiful picture. But here you can see the cool bot where the window would have been where we closed in a window there in the garage, and then ultimately it was perfect. It was like made for it, right? They had a window there. We just had to board it off and put the air conditioner in there, so that worked fantastic. All right, there's another photo of that, and you can see uh, the stack for the oven coming out the top there. Nice widescreen shot of the baking room and the dish area. Of course, the mix room is in there. So now I didn't have, I didn't build that the building. So for some reason, it's on a different level. We actually had to step up into the mix room. So we built this platform so we could roll a rack out and then down. That worked out great. Never had any issues. Rack of bread isn't that heavy. So you had to turn it sideways so the pans didn't, or the boards didn't shoot out at you, but it worked well. Here's a good shot from the top of the oven. Just again, if you're running a gas oven, this is fairly common. There's the 6-inch B vent pipe that's coming out, draft inducer, all that, and there's the 7-inch, and then all the electrical for the mini tube is wired in. So we have the junction box on the roof there, and it's wired in on top. So here we have progressed into the brown bags with the sticker logo on it. Now, yeah, it was called Eggebrecht's Baker Number 9 because I'm a ninth generation baker, certainly the ninth baker in the United States, and that I wanted to kind of give respect to my family's legacy as bakers. So it's Eggebrecht's Baker Number 9. It's kind of a handful, but I like it. It worked. Jalapeno and cheddar bread. Jalapeno and cheddar bread. I know. A few purists out there would probably make fun of me, but I tell you, it's pretty good. An egg sandwich on that. Wow, it's really pretty awesome. I'll show you some of the photos of the bread that we got out of that. Getting closer to the look ultimately that I'm after with the breads here. We're coming in. The color is coming around. The bake time is coming around, and what I mean by that is like this is all going back and forth with different people and customers and trying to figure out how to hone in on what people are wowed by. Because I can make a lot of different breads. And I make a lot of different breads for different people. So these are some breads from using an interesting basket. These baskets were basically what you would sell. You serve chips in a burger in or something like that. They were kind of wire baskets that had a plastic coating on it. They work pretty well. They're certainly not meant for bread, but why not? They were still food grade, and you could run them through the washer. In the Pacific Northwest, where I baked for many years, in Portland, Kalamata olive was always one of the most popular, but it just wasn't that popular in this area. So we didn't have to make it every week. I mean, there were some followers for it, but ultimately that wasn't their favorite. This was one of its their favorites, the rosemary sea salt. So this has fresh chopped rosemary. Again, this is the sourdough, and then that sea salt on top, which ultimately I think is a almost a pretzel salt. So it didn't disappear, from in the bake. And but then with the rosemary, it's just a great bread, very popular. And so we did take the sourdough and break it into, plain was the most. And then we had the potato chive from it, Kalamata olive, rosemary, sea salt, and maybe another one. But that was kind of the base of all of our breads. And then from there, I had the baguettes and ciabatta and challah and some things that were just additional to that. There's the mixer being filled with starter and probably getting ready to mix the sourdough there. Now, the whole grain miche was pretty popular, but so I've always dreamed of that's what I want to do is make 2 kilo loaves and sell it by the quarter or the half. That was kind of like the nod back to ancient times with the communal ovens and people bringing the big loaves and stuff. And so, um, put a little decorative cut on the top. And so anyway, that's kind of what this is a nod to. I think it was about 90% whole grain, 10% high gluten flour. It had its own starter and it's mixed grain, whole grain starter. It was sour and it's just basically a traditional miche. So by this time, we're getting into full production. You can see the bread start to pile up, and you'll be able to see the sourdough here in a second. More whole grain miche. Here's the walk-in room. This is how I bagged everything, and you can see couche baskets in there. I did cover it with the plastic rack bags, and of course, I'd leave those off for a period of time, let the cool air get in there, and get that dough just to slow down, bag it, and just to keep it from getting too crusty. I mean, it was a drier climate. Idaho in general is a drier climate, unlike the Pacific Northwest, Portland, Seattle, where it's more moist. This is how I delivered the breads, basically Home Depot tubs. It was great because you could actually stack them and then get them either in a delivery van or the truck with a cab over it, and get those out to the farmers markets. And it helped keep just actually helped keep them a little fresher in the commute and stuff like that. We got some swag, right? The Eggerbricks Baker number 9 logo shirts. I don't hesitate at all buying these things. I really feel like that it's just the way to go. You'll see when I get to the markets here where I have the canopy, it's all logoed. We really did everything on the up and up in the correct way, I feel, from the shirts to the branding and all of that. And if it's in your budget and you're opening, that you're going to launch your business and push it, I would definitely suggest that you go ahead and do those things, get your branding done. It's makes saying things so much smoother for you when you launch your business if you just get it done and over with in the beginning. Here's the sourdough put to bed, probably in the walk-in there. As you can see, it does have some whole wheat flour in it. I think it was about 10%. And ultimately, this is the bread that I was most proud of that finally arrived. I think that maybe you all can agree that, that is a good looking loaf. And if you don't agree, don't tell me. Um, it has a nice bake. It's not burnt, but it has a full bake to it. The crust is there, but it's not overly thick. The crust has amazing flavor, and the crumb is amazing. You could use it for sandwiches, soups, salads, anything you want. It's just a really good loaf. And I think you'll hopefully agree with me that these loaves now look far superior to than some of those first loaves that I was toying with in the beginning. And again, me trying to figure out what I want to make and how it coincides with what my customers ultimately want to buy. Yeah, we did have a few complaints, at the market that people would say, "Oh, your bread is burnt" or something like that. Usually an old timer or something. But really, what's funny about baking dark is that if you bake a loaf like this and then just reach in and pull out the crumb, the middle part of the bread and take a bite of it, it actually is infused with these flavors that are from the crust because it permeates the whole loaf. It really changes the whole flavor, and you can't duplicate that by a light par baked looking loaf, So really encourage you to toy with that if you're running or starting your own micro bakery or baking at home. Push that bake and turn that temperature up. It's not necessarily just leaving it in there longer. I think these were 36 minutes at 475 degrees. So maybe 470. 470, I think it was. 36 minutes, 470. That's what I was getting. I do wish I had some right now. All right, so it's market time. They did a little promo for us, coming to going to the market, what have you. Actually, I think that's the same photo that was just on the picture there a minute ago. So what's interesting is that our farmers market that we went to was in the mall, and so it's year round market, which is kind of cool. Up in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, they a gentleman bought the whole mall that was kind of defunct and basically outfitted it with his own outdoor stores and that type of thing. Pretty much was filling every spot in there with different. It was a Carhartt store and then a camping store and stuff like that. But then he ran uh, the farmers market year round. So in the nice weather, it was outside in the parking lot. In the wintertime, we just fill up the whole mall through the aisles. But w- we ended up renting a kiosk there, and I can't say that it was a great idea, but maybe we didn't use it to its fullest capacity. So we would stage around that on Saturday mornings for the farmers market, but we could also then meet people there if we were having bread pickup. So there was times where we would just drop bread off and it would be tagged. Kind of risky because somebody could have stole it, but they didn't. Basically say, yeah, your bread is available on a Thursday bake or something like that. We would place bread on there in the bag stapled shut, and people would come and pick up their bread. So here is the farmers market and how we had our canopy set up, and you can kind of see the display from the different racks that we had from mobile rack, something like that. If you want, drop it in the comments, and I can plug their name into where we would get these different racks at. This was our display at the farmers market. You can see that we ultimately settled on windowed bags with the label, and the breads are wrapped inside of that. Maybe the baguettes aren't, but certainly the other loaves were. And we had signage, and again, these cool racks. This is a bicycle looking rack with like a Parisian style bicycle with baskets on it. Very cool, just very cool stuff. So now I'll tell you, this is a funny story that the local hardware store ended up being one of our biggest customers. They let us put a rack in there, and I would take them about 60 or 80 loaves of bread on a Friday. And so they would sell that bread for Friday and Saturday. And again, we had it saran wrapped inside the bag. So it was totally wonderful. But the hardware store, we would just keep track with it. And then they would take the money and then they would pay us out. We just had a little booklet. They became one of the biggest sellers of our bread just because our local customers could like walk in the door. They'd see that because the hardware store, everybody went there. It was just an institution in that little town. And so, yeah, we'd take them extra bins. We'd fill this whole rack full of bread, and they would have extra bins like under the table in the back so they could pull more bread out. It was amazing. It was such a great deal, and we love those guys. So I think I'll just close by saying that that's my micro bakery experience. Ultimately, everybody might want to know why I still don't have it, and just some personal events that happened in my life that I had to walk away from those things. But I now reside in southern Idaho, and I figured that I would share that with everyone. It was a lifelong dream to be able to have that bakery, and I have to say, it was very rewarding to be able to meet with the community and get to know people that I otherwise wouldn't have met, and just be proud of my profession. So it was a very great experience. So I know that it was somewhat of a just a splash at you of pictures and photos. But hopefully it kind of shows you that journey through getting the oven and having that delivered, the installation. Maybe we learned a little bit about how the hookups go, and ultimately how much bread that we were baking. I was baking about 200 to 300 loaves a couple times a week, and that seemed to be a good number. I was able to replace my salary, or at least make some money. A lot of people ask, why exactly did I, put in such a big oven? I think that oven is probably, in the $50,000 to $60,000 range now, and delivered and installed type of thing. And so I paid a little less than that. Of course, that was, back before all the crazy inflation. But the I wanted to make money. If you're baking 12 loaves or 25 or 50 loaves, 50 loaves even times $10 a loaf or something like that's $500 a bake. And I wanted to generate a couple $1,000s a bake. And that's what I needed personally. So going at it with smaller numbers wasn't going to cut it. And the price of the oven easily is covered at those numbers. If you're baking 200 or 300 loaves, 2, 3, 4 times a week, then the cost of the oven doesn't really play much into it. Now, if you're not utilizing your equipment and you bought a piece of expensive equipment, ultimately, then you're out of balance. So I had 750 square feet, and let's say 600 to 900 loaves a week at $7 to $10 a loaf. So I wanted to be competitive, and again, this is also before things skyrocketed in price. But I wanted to be competitive with the pricing of our breads, and so at that time it was $7 for a plain sourdough. Now I'm sure it's easily 9 or 10. It's hard to believe just in 5 or 6 years that things have moved that quickly in price, or changed that much. But yeah, so $7 for those. I wanted people to rely on me for their daily and weekly breads, and buy 10 loaves at a time, and not feel like that it was just an extravagance. Now we had things that fit that. More expensive items, it had Kalamata olive and the potato chives and those types of things that were much more expensive. They would go up to $9 or $10. But the standard breads, I definitely wanted people to be loyal customers and come back for their weekly bread. And we did. And in my market, I was able to sell, sometimes somebody would order 30 loaves if they just came to town once in a while or whatever. Many people would take grocery sacks of bread away from the market, 10 loaves at a time. So apparently we did something right. Um, so I wish you the best. Reach out to me. I do have a strong relationship with Empire Bakery Equipment, and handle sales for them, as well as do consulting for my own company, Artisan Baking Resources. And so if you have any questions about the oven that you saw in the video, or the mixer, or anything else in equipment related, or consulting questions that you'd like to ask me, just please, you can find me on my website at artisan-baking.com. You can use the links in the YouTube video. And ultimately, please like and subscribe. Don't have nearly enough subscribers. We're getting plenty of views on watches, but we definitely really need you to like and subscribe, and comment if you would, because I'd love to hear from you. Putting in a lot of time on these videos, and it would be great to hear from you guys, and just to start up with questions and see if I can answer them, and maybe somebody else in the comments or community can answer as well. So thank you so much for bearing with me, and I hope that this was educational, and we'll be back to some great interviews coming soon. So long.